Hey everyone, this is Thomas from TC Hall Leather, and today we have a tutorial for our Volta card holder. This is a free pattern that you can download from our website. The link is in the description. First, we want to start out by cutting out our template. Here we use some cereal boxes because the cardboard is nice and firm. Today we're using two beautiful pieces of horse leather. This one's turquoise Marengo horse front. Both of the pieces come in at about 2.5 to 3 ounces, which is 1 to 1.2 millimeters. I find that works pretty well for this type of card holder because it gives you enough strength but also enough flexibility. Our second piece of leather is a glazed horse butt. It's almost like shell Cordovan, but not nearly as expensive and not quite so stiff. We're cutting out larger pieces than we need right now from the patterns, just so that we can operate without wielding around these giant pieces of leather. I'm using a scratch awl here to mark out my pieces. And here we're going to take our knife. You can use an X-Acto blade or some sort of leather knife, or even a box cutter is just fine. And we're going to cut out our pieces as precisely as we possibly can. You're going to see me using the guides on my cutting mat quite a bit, because just like woodworking, you always want to have at least one true edge, and the guides on the mat really help with that. I'll be setting my wing dividers here to account for trim allowance or edge allowance, but since this is supposed to be a beginner tutorial, I didn't include the notation for edge allowance on the document, on the PDF. So if you want to use the trim allowance, feel free. It's more of an advanced technique, but once you get used to it, it's super helpful, and I do highly recommend using trim allowance whenever you're able to, just for the cleanest edges possible. I'm cutting away some of the edge allowance here to allow me to make the tight radius cuts on the top of the Volta card holder. Here we're using a radius tool, but you can use anything that has some sort of curvature to it. A coin works really well, a bottle cap, whatever you have lying around. Next we're going to sand. I'm starting with 150 grit, but you can use essentially whatever you have on hand, as long as you work from the coarsest to the smoothest. So I'm going from 150 to about 400. We'll be heating up our edge creaser next. I've been told that you don't have to use a French baguette scented candle, but I haven't tested it myself. I'm just going to stick with that. Here you'll see me make a little mistake, but that's okay. We all make mistakes, no matter how much experience we have, and it usually turns out okay. If you don't have an edge creaser, that is alright. It does not need to happen for this project. I just like the way it looks. This is a very cheap edge creaser from an Amazon kit, so they don't have to be very expensive. Next, we're beveling our edges with an edge beveler. This is to give your edges a nice curved feeling, and whenever we go to burnish them, it's really going to give them a shine. You don't want your edges mushrooming out, which is what will happen if you don't bevel them, especially with a lot of use, like a wallet's going to get. When you go to burnish your edges, you can use almost anything from water to gum trag to beeswax, but I like to use Tokonol from Saiwa Leather Company, and I also use their glue, which I'll show you here in a little bit. A little bit of Tokonol goes a long way. It's a water-based solution, which is really nice because it's non-toxic and it washes off hands very easily. I've got this really neat electric burnisher that's attached to an extremely rusty drill press. If you don't have one of these, that's completely fine. I'll be using a manual burnisher a little bit later on. Anything that creates friction will work. It could be a stick or a piece of canvas. Here we have our wing dividers again, and we're marking out our glue lines. We want to make sure we know where our glue is going, because that'll save us a lot of headaches later on. I'll be using a roughing tool here to help coarsen up the grain side or the smooth side of our leather. You can use a screwdriver or a needle or a scratch-all, whatever you have on hand. But anytime we're gluing the grain side, we need to make sure it's rough. Here's our glue. This is the Saiwa Ace Bond, or the water-based glue that I spoke about earlier. I really like this stuff. The only caveat is that it needs to be fairly tacky, fairly dry before you start sticking it together, just to make sure that it gets a good bond without any air bubbles. And here's our first piece being glued together. This is the interior piece of the Volta. We need to make sure this is fully secured before we move on to the next piece. I have a roller tool here. I just got it from Amazon. There are some really nice rollers out there. Or you could just use a bone folder, a hammer, your hand, something smooth that isn't going to mar the leather. Now we're going to glue our external piece to our internal piece. This happens in 2 steps because of the way that it folds over. So we need to make sure that we glue the correct side to the correct facing side. Otherwise, you're going to have some glue in some awkward places. So make sure you know which way is up. Now we're ready for the final press. We're going to fit these pieces together, make sure that they're nice and snug, use our roller or our bone folder or our hammer, and we're going to leave it for as long as it takes for the glue to set. I have a ceiling fan on in this room, so it only takes about 10 to 20 minutes for the glue to fully cure. What I'm doing here is cutting off my trim allowance or my edge allowance. As you can see, it leaves a really clean cut, almost like a rock face. You don't have to do this. If you want to just go with the original pattern, the original template in the PDF, and fold the 2 pieces together without making those cuts, it's going to come together just fine. You just might have to do a little bit more sanding. And speaking of sanding, that's what we're doing here. I went ahead and roughed it up with some of our 150 grit sandpaper. And I started to use our pricking irons here. These are Rocky Mountain European style pricking irons, or punches, whichever you like to call them. They're 3.85 millimeters. You'll see me pantomiming there because I seem to have deleted the original footage of making these holes. So just pretend that I'm making the holes for the first time. I have a 9 and a 2 tooth. And it really helps to have the 2 tooth to work around those corners. You'll see me closing up the holes a little bit with a bone folder. That helps the leather to really heal itself before you start stitching. This is a Ritza Tiger thread, 0.6 millimeters. The way that I measure is I take the length of my item and then I multiply that times 4, maybe 4.5. It's not a perfect formula, depending on the thickness of your project, but that's about how much I use on a regular basis. I'm doing a saddle stitch here. I don't have enough time in the video to explain exactly how to do a saddle stitch, working with 2 needles, but I'll make another video in the future explaining that. There are tons of videos on YouTube about how to do a good saddle stitch and how to make nice slanted, clean stitches. Here I'm snipping off the thread, and we're going to use a thread zap to burn down the polyester ends of the thread. If you don't have a thread zap, that's fine. You can use a candle, you can use a match, anything that creates enough heat. Make sure to beat down your stitches. You can use anything heavy for this, but if your stitches are raised, they have a chance of getting caught on something. Here's our old friend, French baguette. Time for the final crease. We're on the home stretch here. What we're going to do now is work our way around the card holder with our edge beveler, taking off that lip and preparing for burnishing. This time I'm going to use a manual burnisher so that you can see just how easy it is to use something around the house. We have more toconol. We'll do this in 2 passes. 1 layer of toconol, our hand burnishing, then we moved up to 400 grit sandpaper. Another very light layer of toconol, not much at all. Followed by more hand burnishing. And I finish it off with a piece of canvas from Tandy. Look at that shine. This is why I always tell people to learn how to use trim allowance. We're using a bone folder here to just open up the pockets. Make sure there's no excess glue. Give it a final brush with a horsehair. And there we have it. I hope that you had a good time making this Volta card holder. Feel free to look through the video as many times as you need, or to contact me on Instagram, or on Facebook, or my website, or my email. I'm happy to help. Look forward to more of these free tutorials, more videos to come, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.